When I closed the deal on my company, the first thing I did was sit back in my office chair and stare at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what had just happened. $12 million, $12 million. My own company, built from scratch, with sleepless nights, endless pitches, and more coffee than any human should consume, had finally been sold. The check wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a symbol of a decade of relentless effort, sacrifice, and belief in an idea that had seemed impossible when I first sketched it on the back of a napkin. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of achievement. I had done it. I had really done it. And yet, amid the exhilaration, I felt a twinge of unease. My phone buzzed repeatedly with notifications. Congratulations from colleagues, distant investors, and old friends. But one message stood out, simple and unmistakable. Mia, my best friend since college, my confidant, the person who had celebrated every minor win and commiserated with every failure. Her text was short, but it carried a weight I hadn't anticipated. We need to talk. Call me. I froze for a moment, staring at the screen. Normally, her texts were emojis, gifs, and sarcastic quips. We need to talk sounded serious. My stomach flipped. I thought back to the early days of my startup, when Mia had been there for me in ways only a best friend could be. She had attended every launch party, stayed up with me to brainstorm marketing campaigns, and listened patiently while I ranted about investors who didn't understand my vision. She had cried with me when deals fell through and celebrated with me when tiny victories kept me afloat. I appreciated her genuinely, but her support had always been emotional, intangible, and priceless in a personal sense, not transactional, or so I had thought. By the time I got to her apartment, I was already anticipating the worst. Mia opened the door immediately, her expression unreadable, and gestured for me to sit. Olivia, she said, voice carefully controlled, congratulations on the sale. 12 million. Wow. I smiled awkwardly, the thrill of the sale dimming slightly under her measured tone. Thanks, Mia. It's been a long road, huh? She nodded slowly, folding her hands in her lap. It has. And I've been thinking, about all those years and how I've been there for you, listening, helping, supporting. Emotionally, her eyes locked on mine, steady, expectant. I blinked, uncertain how to respond.
Yeah.
You've been amazing, truly. I don't know what I would have done without you. There was genuine warmth in my words, but also a cautious edge. I could sense this conversation was veering into territory I wasn't prepared for. Mia took a deep breath, and then she said it. So, I think it's fair that I get a share of the sale. 50%. I felt my chest tighten as if someone had pressed down on it. 50%. My brain stalled. Excuse me? I said, laughing nervously, hoping she was joking. Mia was not joking. Her eyes were serious, unwavering. 50%, she repeated, slower this time, as if emphasizing a simple truth. I've been your emotional support through every step of this company, Olivia. Every meltdown, every panic attack, every sleepless night, I've been there. And honestly, I think I deserve half. I could feel my pulse hammering in my temples, my vision narrowing slightly as disbelief washed over me. Mia, wait, you're serious? 50% of $12 million. That's, I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice even. That's $6 million. For emotional support. I waved my hand vaguely, unsure how else to articulate the absurdity. I don't understand. Emotional support isn't a stake in a company. It's friendship. She leaned back, folding her arms, clearly expecting me to cave under the weight of guilt she knew she could summon. Friendship is great, Olivia, but think about it. You wouldn't have survived half the stress without me. The investors you impressed, the confidence you showed, all those late nights you thought you were alone, I was there. That counts for something, right? Her tone was calm, but her words were laced with the subtle expectation of entitlement. I rubbed my temples, trying to process this. I had always prided myself on being rational, on separating business from personal life. But here she was, blurring the lines in a way that made my stomach twist. Mia, emotional support is invaluable. I won't deny that, I said slowly, choosing my words carefully, but it's not quantifiable. And it's definitely not the same as building a business, taking risks, investing money, or actually growing a company. That's something you can't just divide. She tilted her head, her expression almost pleading, though there was a stubborn edge underneath. You say that, but don't you think all those pep talks, the weekends you cried while I listened, the advice I gave you when you were unsure, don't you think that helped? Don't you think I deserve something tangible? I leaned back in my chair, trying to steady my racing heart. I couldn't believe the conversation had escalated to this point. Couldn't believe my best friend was putting a number on years of friendship, on loyalty, on care. Part of me wanted to scream, part of me wanted to laugh, and part of me felt a flicker of guilt, wondering if I was being too cold, too logical, too ruthless. But I reminded myself this was my life, my company, my money. And no one, no matter how close, had a legal claim to half of what I had built from the ground up. I get it, Mia, I said finally, voice calm but firm. I get that you've supported me emotionally, and I value that more than you know. But you need to understand, emotional support isn't equity. It's not a tangible contribution to the growth of my company. I can't just hand over half of my hard-earned money because someone listened to me cry or offered advice. That's not how business works. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and I could see the frustration simmering beneath the surface. So, what? You're saying I get nothing? She asked quietly, almost as if testing me. My chest tightened again. I hated that the conversation had come to this. Hated that we were even discussing a monetary value for friendship, but I knew I had to be firm. I'm saying you get exactly what you contributed, Mia, which, to be honest, while invaluable to me personally, doesn't translate into financial ownership. I can thank you, celebrate you, appreciate you, but I can't give you half of something that's entirely mine. That wouldn't be fair to either of us. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and I could see the gears turning in her mind. The mental calculus of entitlement versus reality. For the first time, I realized just how complicated this friendship had become. It had always been emotional, supportive, intimate, but now it had entered the realm of money, ownership, and expectation. And I knew, with a sinking feeling, that this conversation would change everything. I took a deep breath, placing a hand on my chest. Mia, I love you. I really do. You've been my rock. But this demand, it's crossing a line. Emotional support is priceless, but it's not currency. And no amount of guilt or argument will change that. I hope you can understand that. I watched her for a long moment, hoping, praying even, that she would see reason. That we could navigate this without destroying years of friendship. But deep down, I knew the next words she said or didn't say would determine whether that was possible. The next day, Mia came over to my apartment, and I braced myself for the confrontation I knew was coming. I had spent hours mentally preparing, going over every word I could say, every argument I could make, but nothing could completely brace me for the intensity of facing her in person. She walked in with that familiar confidence, the kind that usually made me laugh or roll my eyes. But today, it carried a weight that made my stomach twist. Her eyes, usually warm and teasing, were sharp and serious. Olivia, we need to settle this, she said, voice steady. I gestured toward the couch, and we both sat down, the air between us thick with tension. I tried to smile, to lighten the mood, but it felt hollow. Mia, I've been thinking about what you said yesterday. I began carefully, and I want you to understand where I'm coming from. She tilted her head slightly, waiting. You know, I value you, your support, everything you've done for me over the years. But demanding half of my company's sale? That's not reasonable. She leaned forward, placing her hands on her knees, eyes intense. Not reasonable. Olivia, I've been your emotional support for years. I've been there through everything, your breakdowns, your doubts, your sleepless nights. I've been your sounding board, your cheerleader, your constant, and now that your company is worth millions, you're saying that doesn't count for anything? Her words hit me like a punch to the chest. I could feel a flush of anger rising, mixed with guilt I didn't deserve. Mia, I said, my voice calm but firm. I can't give you equity in my company for being my friend. I understand that I've leaned on you a lot, that you've been there for me, and I will never discount that. But the value of a business isn't determined by emotional support. It's determined by revenue, clients, investment, and the work I've done to grow it. That's not personal, it's reality. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, and I could see the frustration building. Reality. Olivia, do you really think this is just about money? It's about fairness. It's about recognizing that I've contributed to your success in ways no one else has. Don't you think all those pep talks and late-night conversations helped you make decisions that led to this sale? Don't you think that has value? I leaned back, taking a deep breath to steady myself. Of course, it has value to me personally, but there's a difference between emotional support and direct contribution to the growth and profitability of a business. You haven't invested capital. You haven't closed deals. You haven't built client relationships. You've been my friend and I cherish that, but friendship doesn't entitle someone to half of a multi-million-dollar business. That's not how it works. Her eyes flashed and I felt a pang of sorrow. I hated that this conversation had turned into an argument, hated that the person I had trusted the most was now sitting across from me, demanding what I had worked my entire adult life to achieve. So, what, you're saying I get nothing? After everything, she said, voice rising slightly, emotion spilling through the edges of her calm facade. Yes, I said firmly, though my heart ached at the word. You get what you deserve as my friend, as someone I love and value, but that isn't 50% of my company. Emotional support is invaluable, but it doesn't equate to ownership. I can thank you, celebrate you, and honor our friendship, but I can't give you equity that isn't yours. That would be unfair to both of us and to the reality of the work I've done. She sat back, her expression a mixture of disbelief and hurt. I can't believe you're saying this. After everything I've done for you, you're just closing the door on me. Her voice wavered, but her posture was rigid, as if she were trying to project strength despite feeling betrayed. I felt a sharp twist of guilt. I hated seeing her hurt, hated knowing that she felt dismissed, but I knew that giving in would destroy everything I had built. Mia, I said softly, I will never dismiss what you've done for me, but there's a difference between valuing your support and giving you something you haven't earned in a business sense. I can't give away half of $12 million because I needed someone to listen to me. That's not fair to me, to my employees, to the company I built. She shook her head, her long hair falling over her shoulder, and I could see the storm raging behind her eyes. So, you're saying that my love, my presence, my guidance, none of that matters? It's all meaningless. The pain in her voice was genuine, and I felt it too. It hurt to see a friendship I had cherished for over a decade reduced to what felt like a transaction. But deep down, I knew she was wrong. Support was priceless. But it wasn't currency. I'm saying it has meaning, I said gently, leaning forward, hands clasped. It has meaning to me. Every hug, every pep talk, every brainstorming session, we've shared so much, and I will never forget that. But meaningful doesn't mean financially compensable. There's a line. Mia, and demanding half of something I built crosses it. It's not a judgment on you, it's a boundary. And I have to protect that boundary. Her eyes glistened, and I could see the conflict in her face. She wanted to argue, to manipulate, to make me feel guilty. But I had rehearsed this moment, steeled myself for it, and refused to let emotion cloud my judgment. I'm not trying to hurt you, I said quietly, voice firm. I'm trying to be fair to both of us. And the fair thing is to recognize your support for what it is, not to assign a number to it. You'll always be my best friend, Mia, but you will not be a business partner if you didn't contribute in that way. She sat back, silent for a long moment, and I could feel the tension in the room like a living thing. Finally, she muttered, almost to herself, I guess I overestimated my value. Her words stung, but they also carried a note of understanding. I reached out and touched her hand gently. Mia, you have immeasurable value in my life. You always will. But this is about protecting what I built. I hope someday you can see it that way. She nodded slowly, still processing, still hurt, but the anger had shifted slightly to resignation. I could see the realization settling in our friendship. Would never be exactly the same, but at least the boundary was clear. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of relief. A quiet sense that I had stood firm, defended myself, and maintained my integrity. After Mia left that day, I sat in my office, staring at the sleek hardwood desk and the framed photos of my startup's first team, and felt my mind shift into overdrive. I knew I couldn't respond emotionally, couldn't let guilt or shock dictate my next move. She had demanded half of $12 million, which was absurd. But I also understood that simply saying no without context wouldn't satisfy her. If she was going to press, I had to respond on her terms logically, cleverly, and without compromising my own principles. I needed a way to quantify her contribution, something tangible she couldn't argue with, yet perfectly reflected the reality. I opened my laptop and began making a list. Every event she had attended, every pep talk she had given me, every brainstorming session we'd had, it all went into a document. I wrote down dates, times, and even the locations when I could remember them. Startup pitch, rehearsal March 2015, 3 hours. Coffee shop, I typed product launch party June 2016, 6 hours, venue downtown. I kept adding notes. Nights she had stayed up with me when investors' feedback devastated me. Weekends she had listened to me fret over small setbacks. Text messages she had sent to cheer me on. By the time I had finished, the list was pages long, but none of it had direct financial impact. I leaned back and let out a long breath. If I was being honest, the list read more like a tribute to friendship than business. Every line reminded me of her loyalty, her humor, her empathy, and the countless moments where she had been my confidant. And yet, when I considered her demand 50% of $12 million, I felt an almost physical recoil. None of those late-night texts had closed deals. None of those pep talks had secured funding. None of those brainstorming sessions had directly increased revenue. In other words, she had given exactly what she had offered me. Emotional support. I smiled wryly at the realization. I could offer her exactly what she had given me. A spreadsheet of hours spent, events attended, and pep talks delivered. Nothing more. If she wanted to argue with that, she could, but it would be impossible to inflate the value of what she had actually contributed. The idea gave me a sense of satisfaction I hadn't expected. Instead of feeling cornered or guilty, I felt empowered. I had turned her own logic against her in the cleanest, most rational way possible. I began drafting a message, careful to keep the tone professional yet pointed. Mia, I typed, pausing to breathe. After reviewing the contributions you've made to my company's journey, I have quantified your support to ensure fairness. Based on hours, events, and emotional guidance, the total value of your contribution equates to exactly what you have given me: moral support, time, and advice. I paused again, thinking about how she might react, and added a list of specifics. Pitch rehearsal hours, late-night venting sessions, launch parties attended, pep talks. Each item was documented with dates and durations. The more I wrote, the more I realized how absurd the situation had become. Here I was, preparing a meticulous accounting of friendship, trying to translate devotion and loyalty into measurable units. Because she had believed emotional support deserved monetary reward, I couldn't help but laugh quietly at the irony. But I also felt a sense of control, a quiet vindication. I wasn't giving in. I wasn't being manipulated. I was being fair, and fair meant giving her exactly what she had provided. Nothing more, nothing less. By the end of the evening, I had a full document ready. Mia's contribution assessment. I read through it carefully, checking for errors, ensuring clarity, and keeping the tone factual. There was no emotion, no sarcasm, no bitterness, just a precise accounting of her involvement. It was absurd, hilarious even, but entirely accurate. Every late-night pep talk, every text message, every supportive weekend was accounted for, summed, and presented in a way that made her claim for half the company impossible to justify. I leaned back in my chair and allowed myself a small smile. The power dynamic had shifted. I spent the next day rehearsing how I would present it to her. If she didn't respond well to the email, I imagined her walking in, expecting me to cave, and me handing her a printed copy. Cool and calm, letting the data speak for itself. Here's what you've contributed, Mia. I would say, enjoy. The thought made me chuckle quietly, a mix of relief and mischief washing over me. Finally, I felt like I had a plan, a strategy that protected both my finances and my dignity. Later that evening, I drafted the email and hit send. I tried not to check my phone obsessively, though I failed miserably. Each ping made my heart jump, a mix of anxiety and anticipation. I knew her response could be anything from shock to outrage to complete acceptance. But I reminded myself, the goal wasn't to please her. It was to set a boundary, to be fair, and to stand firm without apology. Emotional support was priceless, yes, but it was not half of $12 million. That night, I sat on my balcony, staring at the city lights, reflecting on the absurdity and the empowerment of what I had just done. Mia had always been a constant in my life, and I had loved her for it. But love and friendship, I realized, did not entitle anyone to claim ownership over what someone else had created. I had discovered that fairness and loyalty could coexist with boundaries, and that realization gave me a sense of strength I hadn't fully appreciated before. As I leaned back in my chair, feeling the cool breeze on my face, I whispered to myself, "You've got this, Olivia. This is your life, your company, your achievements. No one gets to dictate the rules but you." I felt a rare, unshakable confidence settling in, the kind that comes from knowing you've acted logically, creatively, and ethically. The absurdity of quantifying friendship didn't diminish the strength of the gesture, it reinforced it. I was unflinching, clear, and unapologetically me. By the next morning, the anticipation had given way to clarity. Whatever Mia's response, I had taken control of the narrative. I had quantified exactly what she had provided and communicated it transparently. I had honored her contribution in a way that reflected reality while safeguarding my achievements. I realized that this wasn't just about money. It was about respect, boundaries, and the courage to assert them. And that, more than anything, felt like victory. When Mia finally responded to my email, I braced myself for the emotional hurricane I knew was coming. The subject line alone, "Are you serious?" was enough to make my stomach tighten. I opened it with cautious fingers, reading her words slowly, digesting every accusation and exclamation. She accused me of being cruel, ungrateful, and calculating. She said I was quantifying our friendship, reducing years of loyalty and love into numbers on a spreadsheet, and she demanded that I reconsider. Her tone was sharp, indignant, and tinged with disbelief. I felt a flash of exasperation, tempered by the faint amusement that this entire argument was unfolding over spreadsheets and time logs. I knew this wouldn't end with emails. Mia was the kind of person who needed confrontation, needed to see her point face to face. So I agreed to meet her, choosing a neutral cafe halfway between our apartments. I arrived early, sipping coffee and rehearsing how I would handle the conversation. My mind flickered through every possible reaction: anger, tears, pleading, entitlement. I reminded myself to stay calm, rational, and unyielding. Emotional manipulation wouldn't work this time. I had already quantified the facts, and I had to stick to them. When Mia arrived, she immediately spotted me, striding toward the table with that familiar confidence. But today, there was fire in her eyes, a storm barely contained beneath the surface. She slid into the seat opposite me, setting her bag down with a sharp thud. "Olivia, we need to talk," she said, though her voice carried both accusation and disbelief. I smiled thinly, holding my composure. "We are talking," I replied, gesturing toward the printed copy of the spreadsheet I had brought. Her eyes widened slightly, and I could see a flicker of apprehension. "I can't believe you did this," she began, hands pressing down on the table. "You actually quantified our friendship. You made a list of every pep talk, every venting session, every weekend I spent listening to you complain." I nodded calmly, letting the tension hang between us. "I did," I said, "because you demanded 50% of my company. And if we're going to talk numbers, we need facts. Here's exactly what you contributed, Mia. Hours spent, events attended, emotional support provided, nothing more, nothing less." Her lips pressed into a thin line, and I could see the mix of shock and indignation on her face. "You're ridiculous," she spat, leaning back in her chair. "You can't just reduce years of friendship to a spreadsheet. Do you even hear yourself?" I took a slow sip of coffee, maintaining eye contact. "I hear myself very clearly. And I want to make one thing clear. I'm not dismissing you. I value you. I love you. But emotional support isn't equity. You cannot claim half of something you did not build or invest in. It's as simple as that." Mia's voice trembled now, a mix of anger and disbelief. "So after everything I've done for you, after all the times I've been there for you, you're telling me I get nothing?" Her eyes glistened, though she tried to mask it with a rigid posture. I felt a pang of guilt, the natural ache that comes with seeing someone you love hurt. But I knew yielding to her anger would undo everything. "You get exactly what you contributed," I said gently but firmly. "And that contribution is priceless to me personally, but it does not translate into monetary ownership of my company." Her hands clenched, and she leaned forward, voice rising. "Priceless? You think saying it's priceless makes up for the fact that I could have had half of $12 million? Olivia, you're insane." I leaned back, unshaken, letting her vent. I had expected this. I had anticipated tears, yelling, and arguments, and I had planned for each scenario. "Mia," I said, voice calm, "I understand you're upset, and yes, I expected this reaction. But no amount of outrage changes reality. You didn't build the company. You didn't take the financial risk. You didn't close the deals. You provided emotional support, and I am giving you exactly what you provided." She slammed her hand on the table, drawing glances from nearby patrons. "This is insane. I can't believe you're doing this. After everything." I exhaled slowly, keeping my voice even. "I am doing exactly what is fair. Mia, I am acknowledging your contributions, but I am not being manipulated into giving away what I earned. If you truly value our friendship, you will see that this is the only way to honor it honestly." The cafe fell silent for a moment as she stared at me, breathing heavily, processing the confrontation. Her face softened slightly, though the anger lingered beneath the surface. "So, what, we're done? That's it, just like that?" she asked quietly, almost afraid of the answer. I felt my chest tighten. I didn't want to end the friendship, but I knew that boundaries were essential. I don't want to end the friendship, Mia. I want to preserve it. But I cannot give in to this demand. That would change the nature of everything we've shared. And frankly, it would be dishonest. She looked down, twisting a napkin in her hands. I could see the wheels turning, the realization that she could not force me to bend, that her entitlement had limits against my conviction. The anger didn't vanish entirely, but it shifted into grudging recognition that I was serious, unyielding, and firm. Fine, she muttered finally, voice low. I guess I can't argue with that, but I don't know if I can ever see it your way. I understand, I said softly, reaching across the table to touch her hand briefly. I don't expect you to understand immediately, but I hope, in time, you'll see that fairness doesn't mean giving up everything you want. It means respecting boundaries, valuing contributions accurately, and honoring friendship honestly. Her hand twitched under mine, and I withdrew gently. Letting her process. We sat in silence for several minutes, each lost in thought. The conversation had been raw, tense, and emotionally charged, but I felt a quiet sense of relief. I had stood firm, defended myself, and communicated clearly. I had acknowledged her contributions without compromising my achievements, and I had preserved the moral integrity of our friendship if it would never be exactly the same. Finally, Mia exhaled a long, weary sound and nodded. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay, I get it. I'm angry. But, okay." I smiled faintly, understanding that reconciliation would be a slow process. "Thank you, Mia. That's all I ask. Time, space, and understanding. We'll get through this. Our friendship can survive this if we let it." As we left the cafe, the tension lingered, but so did a glimmer of hope. Mia and I were not the same as we had been, but the truth had been spoken. Boundaries had been set, and fairness had been upheld. I felt empowered, not just for defending my financial rights, but for asserting my values, protecting my work, and refusing to let guilt or manipulation control my decisions. After the cafe confrontation, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and relief. Mia's anger had been intense, but it was over. The line had been drawn, and I had held it. Walking home, the city lights blurred around me as I reflected on everything, the countless hours building the company, the sleepless nights, the victories and the failures, and the friendship that had now changed forever. I realized that standing my ground hadn't just protected my financial future, it had protected my sense of self, my integrity, and my understanding of what fair and equitable really meant. Over the next few weeks, the fallout from the confrontation settled like dust in a sunbeam. Mia didn't call as often, and when she did, the tone was cautious, almost tentative. I noticed the absence, the silence, and it stung in its own way. Friendships didn't heal instantly after breaches of trust, and this one would take time if it healed at all. I missed the camaraderie we had shared, the laughter that used to echo through our late-night conversations. But I also recognized that some sacrifices were necessary to protect myself. Some boundaries, once crossed, could never be ignored. I threw myself back into life with renewed clarity. I upgraded my new apartment, decorating it exactly how I wanted, filling it with light and color, tangible reminders that my life was mine to shape. I planned small celebrations for myself, quiet moments of acknowledgement that I had achieved something monumental. I allowed myself to feel pride without guilt, something I hadn't fully permitted in years when Mia's presence had loomed over my achievements. I realized that I didn't need anyone else's validation to appreciate my own success. Evenings became my favorite time, when the apartment was quiet and I could reflect on the journey. I revisited old notebooks, reading through sketches, business plans, and notes filled with ideas that had seemed impossible at the time. I laughed at some of the mistakes I had made, marveled at the risks I had taken, and appreciated the tenacity that had carried me through. And somewhere in the quiet, I acknowledged that Mia had played a role not in the financial sense but as a witness, a confidant, a cheerleader. She had offered support when I needed it most, and I could honor that without compromising my boundaries. I also began to rebuild other aspects of my life. I reconnected with colleagues I hadn't spoken to in years, invited old friends out for dinner, and explored hobbies that I had neglected while consumed by work. Each interaction reminded me that the world was vast, full of opportunities for connection and collaboration beyond any single person. Mia had been central to my journey, yes, but she was not the only one capable of supporting me, nor the only one whose presence mattered. That realization was liberating, giving me the space to breathe without guilt. Financially, I reveled in the freedom of my decisions. I invested wisely, explored new ventures, and allowed myself to plan vacations and experiences I had postponed for years. Every dollar, every investment, every choice reinforced the truth I had fought to protect. My work, my achievements, and my money were mine. No amount of guilt, manipulation, or entitlement could alter that fact. I felt empowered in a way that went beyond the financial my sense of agency. My ability to assert my values had been reinforced in ways I hadn't expected. Over time, Mia and I began to communicate again, slowly and cautiously. The tension remained, but there was also a tentative acknowledgement that our friendship could survive, even if it would never be exactly as it had been. We met for coffee once, tentatively sharing updates, testing the waters, feeling out the limits of our renewed connection. I could see her effort to understand, to respect the boundaries I had set, and I felt a flicker of hope that our relationship, though altered, could still hold meaning. I often thought about the lesson this situation had taught me. Love and friendship are not commodities. They cannot be reduced to numbers, spreadsheets, or monetary value. Support is priceless, but it is not equity. This realization brought a profound sense of clarity, a framework for all future relationships, personal, professional, emotional. I no longer questioned my worth or felt obligated to trade loyalty for financial reward. I understood that boundaries were not barriers, they were protective, necessary, and ultimately empowering. Looking back, I also recognized how absurd and almost comical the situation had been. Here I was, a successful entrepreneur who had built a multi-million-dollar company, negotiating the value of friendship like a balance sheet. And yet, in that absurdity, there was wisdom. I had discovered the importance of fairness, the necessity of standing firm, and the power of translating principles into action. I had learned that clarity, honesty, and courage could preserve integrity even when relationships were tested to their limits. In the quiet moments of reflection, I allowed myself to feel gratitude for my accomplishments, for the lessons learned, and even for Mia. In the way she had pushed me to assert myself, I realized that I could honor someone's presence in my life without compromising my values. I could acknowledge their support, celebrate the friendship, and still protect the things I had earned. That balance, delicate and vital, became my mantra moving forward. And so, I built a life that was fully my own. I celebrated victories without guilt, laughed freely without fear of judgment, and navigated friendships with clarity and honesty. Mia remained a part of my life, though on different terms. A reminder that relationships evolve and that boundaries are not punishments but safeguards. I had created space for growth, for respect, and for autonomy both for myself and for those I cared about. In the end, standing firm had not only preserved my wealth but had transformed me. I was stronger, more confident, and more capable of navigating the complexities of friendship, business, and self-respect. I realized that success was not just financially, it was emotional, moral, and personal. And as I looked forward to the future, I understood that I could celebrate my achievements, cherish my friendships, and maintain my principles all at once. That realization, more than any paycheck or spreadsheet, felt like the ultimate victory.